The shiur is dedicated to Nishmas Rachaleya Bas Rav Chaim Tzvi. We've been discussing the Isser of Bishul, the Malacha of Bishul, and what we ended up last time discussing is the topic of Ein Bishul Achar Bishul. We pointed out that there is, at least according to Rashi and the view of the Rosh, the Torah as well, a fundamental difference when it comes to the Halacha of Bishul between reheating food, solid food that has been cooked already, and reheating liquid foods that have been cooked already. When it comes to halacha of ein bishul achar bishul, once the food is considered to be cooked, it's always considered to be cooked. So the view of Rashi and the Rosh is that when it comes to a davar yavish, a solid food that does not have liquid in it, so then we assume that halacha of ein bishul achar bishul, like the Mishnah told us, Masechet Shabbos Daf Kuf Mem Hey, like kagon tarna gold of Rabbi Abba, like the chicken of Rabbi Abba, a solid food, to go ahead and reheat that will be permissible. However, when it comes to a liquid, so then we assume the din is yesh bishul achar bishul. It's a fundamental difference, and we explain very clearly the svara, the logic makes perfect sense. When it comes to a solid food, so once you cook it, that process is irreversible. The cooking of a solid food entails a chemical change in the food, a fundamental change in the chefsa shel ochel. And once it's cooked, even if it gets cold, it's fundamentally different than it was when it's raw. It's now cold, cooked food, and therefore the prohibition of bishul, which means to take raw food and cook it up, you can't do that again. Once it's done, it's done. You cannot do it again. That's just physically impossible. Therefore, the halacha of ein bishul achar bishul, and thus subsequent cooking will not entail an isur d'oraisa whatsoever. However, when it comes to liquids, and again the paradigmatic liquid, once we saw that the definition of bishul by liquid is really a function of changing the level of heat, bringing it up to a level of heat, a temperature of yad soledizbo. So once you have that definition of bishul, that's your definition. And certainly when it comes to water, when you cook it up and then cool it down, it actually reverses the process. So then we're going to have the halacha of yesh bishul achar bishul. This is the view of Rashi and the Rosh. Again, just to clarify, when it comes to water, it makes perfect sense. The logic is absolutely clear. Because after all, when water cools down, so you have indeed reversed the process of bishul. If the whole thing of bishul is to go ahead and heat it up to a given temperature, now you put it in the fridge, it cools down, so you've reversed that process. Subsequent cooking is going to be a prohibition of bishul, yesh bishul achar bishul. This was the view of Rashi, the Torah. However, if one takes a look at the Rambam in Perek Tes Hilchot Shabbat, you'll find that when the Rambam brings down the halacha of ein bishul achar bishul, he makes no distinction whatsoever between solid foods and liquid foods, and that draws the Beis Yosef and others to conclude that indeed there is no halachic difference between solid foods and liquid foods. Just like we find that when it comes to a solid food, ein bishul achar bishul, and that's absolutely clear in the Gemara, so too when it comes to liquids, ein bishul achar bishul. Once something has undergone that process of having the heat raised to a certain level, so indeed there is a physical change in the food. Don't tell me there's no physical change. After all, the process of bishul will cause perhaps purification of water, purification of liquid. Certainly when it comes to liquids other than water, you can certainly understand the Rambam's position. After all, imagine a soup. You're preparing soup. When it's raw, when it's uncooked, it's just water with some vegetables, perhaps with some chicken in it. Once you cook it, now it has undergone a fundamental change. You put it in the refrigerator and it cools down. That's not the same as it was beforehand. That's not raw soup. That's cooked, cold soup. As a result, you have physically changed it. Now you want to reheat it. So the Rambam will tell you, ein bishul achar bishul, no different than a davar yavish. So what you have over here is a very fundamental machlokes between the Rishonim, amongst the Rishonim. Again, the Rambam Shita, the Rashba, the Ran, this is all brought down in the Beis Yosef in Siman Shin Yud Ches, is there's no difference between a davar yavish and a davar lach, and according to the view of the Rosh and Rashi, the Torah is there's a difference between a davar yavish and a davar lach. We mentioned at the end of last year, just very quickly, we pointed out that there's a raya, proof that is brought by the Rosh on behalf of the sheet of Rashi from the Gemara in Masechet Shabbos and Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis. Here the Gemara talks about the prohibition of hatmana. You're not allowed to insulate food. Even on Shabbos, you can't insulate food under any circumstance whatsoever. On Erev Shabbos, there's a prohibition of insulating with a davar hamosif hevel. You have insulation, and there's going to be heat generated by this system, so that's prohibited to insulate even on Erev Shabbos. So, for example, if you have food that is sitting on a blech, you want to wrap it in a towel, that system is generating heat, that's prohibited even on Erev Shabbos. On Shabbos, it's even usher to be matmin, to go ahead and do hatzmana b'davar she'ena mosif hevel. You took that pot off of the fire. It's not generating any new heat anymore. Now you want to wrap it up in a towel to preserve the heat. So on Shabbos, that will be usher as well. The Gemara wanted to know on Daf Lamed Aleph, why is that usher? What's the problem of hatzmana? What's going to happen over here? What are we concerned about? And the Gemara has the following language. The concern is, Mipnei ma amru ein tomin b'davar she'ena mosif hevel. What's the problem? The Gemara says gzeira shema yartiach. We are concerned you might come to boil it up. That's the language. Gzeira shema yartiach. Explains Rashi. What does this mean? Gzeira shema yartiach. What might happen is